Right. Good evening, everyone. Very pleased to see you. My name is Alice Sonota, and I'm the director of the Royal Asiatic Society. And I'm very, very pleased to welcome Her Excellency, the Georgian Ambassador, Sophie Katsarava, who we met last year online, but now we can meet in person. So this is our 9th event celebrating Rustaveli, and it's always a very jolly and joyous occasion that we have each year that we've done it. And we've managed to maintain it every year because of actually all the efforts that David Grigori puts into it. And so we have to thank him very much as well. And you may wonder why the Royal Asiatic Society is so closely entwined with Georgia. Well, it goes back to basically the Royal Asiatic Society with the Oriental Translation Fund published the first English translation of the Georgian national epic, A Man in a Panther's Skin by Rustaveli, hence where we celebrate Rustaveli Day. This indeed was the only, I think, English translation up until another one was published in 2015, I think, poetic translation in English. So I welcome you all here tonight, and I think we have a wonderful array of interesting people who have very interesting things to say. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and apologies again. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, we'll have some,
all right.
Yeah, there we go.
Event, so we'll just share a screen to make sure everyone sees the ambassador.
All right.
Yes.
Rest of the event.
Great. That is shared. Great.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everybody. And once again, apologies for being late and to keep you waiting, but not entirely our fault. The roads were blocked. But anyway, we are here today. Last year, I had the pleasure to meet some of you virtually at the event, which was dedicated, which was about the British sources about Georgia, the book that David presented with Georgi Kalandia. Some of you may know, and we all enjoyed the event. But I'm very, very pleased to see you in person, and despite the bumpy period linked with the pandemic, I think we are still managing to move forward and to move ahead. And this event is a great example of that. Well, what I would like to say, of course, first of all, to extend special thanks to David. We all know that it's because all your efforts that the Rustaveli annual event is taking place, the 9th, but it's my second in-person and physical event. And special thanks, of course, to the Royal Asiatic Society and British Georgian Society. What I can see, it's not entirely the second year. It will be the second year next April. But what I see that all of you are contributing to building links between Georgia and the UK, and of course this is what I want to support with all my heart. And cultural links, obviously, the other day David and I both went to one of the cultural events, the film screening, special film screening, which was arranged at a very short notice, I should say. Well done, everybody, again, to the British Georgian Society. But coming back to today's event, I'm sure that the experts and historians will talk more interestingly about today's event. But what is really interesting to see and illuminating as well for all of us, including myself, the links that we see and the information that we get, which might not be known to a general public. And this is what is really important, that we see the findings and the information that is being introduced to the wider society, like yourselves, and the information which might not be known to anybody, not to anybody, but to the wider circle. So I'm very glad that today we are here to listen to a very interesting story about ancient history and ancient characters of the Caucasus and the rich history of the Caucasus and obviously of Georgia, and how it translates in the art and how is it being presented in the art. And this is what we are going to hear today. Anyway, thank you very much. I think it was a bit too long, and once again, big thank you everybody, and I look forward to seeing you. One last sentence that I want to say is actually the forward look. Next year, it's the year when we will be marking 30th anniversary since re-establishing Georgia-UK diplomatic relations. We will be hosting a number of events, cultural as well, where we would love to see you. So we'll keep you informed about the upcoming events, and I hope to see you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Alison. Thank you, Ambassador. Well, next year is also actually will be a 10th anniversary of Rustaveli lectures at the Royal Asiatic Society. So I'm sure we can combine forces and do something interesting to mark this anniversary. We have this is a hybrid event. It's great to see people in real life, you know, after what is now 2 years, although it sort of seems like sort of one period. So firstly, thank you for coming. I would like to sort of welcome everyone on Zoom as well, which is the new kind of modus operandi these days. So we have a second audience online, and I hope everyone can see us. The event is being recorded, so, you know, for future generations and stuff, hopefully this will be something interesting. The way we will start from the historic accounts of Radamisto, the real story, what actually happened, and then we'll move on to Handel and the opera and how sort of that translated. So I have a very interesting talk written by Dr. Manana Odisheli, who's just there. She's actually in Georgia now, so she's joining virtually. So she'll do a live Q&A, but I've been asked to read her talk. So bear with me. If I butcher any historical names, I'm hoping Manana will then sort of retrospectively correct me. So let's start with, let me just open the some slides. Yep, is this good enough for everyone? Good. Yeah, so the topic is obviously Radamisto and the forgotten story of power and struggle in the Caucasus, and we'll see why it's a forgotten story, and actually it's unclear why it's been forgotten, but not forgotten in arts and culture. So the events that unfolded in the small Caucasian kingdom of Iberia in the 1st century of our era, more than 20 centuries ago, reached us through the writings of Roman historian Tacitus and Cassius Dio. The gripping story of the young Iberian prince Radamistus captured the imagination of painters and composers in Europe in the 18th and 19th century. But Georgian chronicles, the Book of Kings and the conversion of Kartli, are silent concerning Radamistus and his father Pharismane, the first of Iberia, who Tacitus describes as the main political player in the Caucasus. Even the name of the Eastern Georgian kingdom, Iberia, has been forgotten and shrouded in mystery. But despite the fact that George Handel's opera Radamisto is loosely based on Tacitus' annals, it does not mention Iberia, Georgia. Instead, Thrace was given as Radamistus' birthplace. The very name Georgia is only the latest in a series of appellations that have been applied to this territory inhabited for millennia. The favorable climate, abundance of rivers, defensive mountains, fertile land made this territory desirable for human activities from earliest times. The region developed an advanced culture long before contacts with the Greeks and Roman worlds. In antiquity, the western part of the country, as you can see on the map, was called Colchis and later Lazica. The east was called Iberia. Colchis and Iberia, which is confusing because obviously we know Spain as Iberia as well, but it's unclear why that happened. Maybe we'll ask Manana afterwards. So Colchis and Iberia were at times separate kingdoms and at times united. Colchis figured large in Greek mythology as a land of great riches, magic and wisdom, and you will know it from Jason and the Argonauts and Prometheus and other Greek mythology, while the Georgian kingdom, the Georgian kingdoms of Iberia and Colchis gained broader independence in the Hellenistic times when Alexander the Great defeated the Persian Empire. According to the life of Kartli, King Parnavas founded Iberia in the Hellenistic period with the support of the kingdom of Antioch. Plutarch states that the Iberians had never submitted either to the Medes or the Persians, and they even escaped Macedonian rule. Georgia is known as the crossroads of cultures and civilizations, but more importantly, it has always stood at the edge of empires. Existence at the frontiers of great powers allowed Colchis and Iberia to evaluate risks and benefits and thus choose their protectors. Over centuries, the Georgian elite oscillated between Western and Eastern powers, and more recently between Northern and Western spheres of influence. The choice was not always theirs, but their flexibility was perhaps pivotal in the survival strategy and was embedded in the nation's psyche. It was in 65 BC that the Kingdom of Iberia experienced the full might of the Roman army. When the Roman general Pompey marched to the Iberian kingdom Tcheta in the pursuit of Mithridates, the sixth of Pontus, Rome's archenemy. After defeating Mithridates, known as the Eupator, Pompey proclaimed that he received Asia as the outmost province of the Roman Empire and returned it in the middle of the country. Pompey paraded the kings of Iberia and Colchis in his triumph at Rome, and the region was placed under the rule of client kings. Cassius Dio relates that in 36 BC, Mark Antony sent the general Crassus to the Caucasus, who defeated the Iberian king Pharnavas II and forced an alliance with him against the Caucasian Albanians and subsequently Parthia. This proved to be the last Roman invasion into Iberia. From Rome's perspective, Iberia was a typical buffer state, a region that did not fully justify the enormous expense of being turned into a full Roman province, but one that could be allowed to fall under control of Rome's powerful eastern adversary, the Parthian Empire. The momentum Assyrianum in Ankara is perhaps the earliest epigraphic evidence of the name Iberia, written as Hiberi. The inscriptions contains information about the diplomatic relations between Iberia and Rome in the times of Augustus. Alliance with Rome had strengthened the position of the Iberian kingdom, so it became a substantial political player in the Caucasus. Iberia, guarded by the mountain passes over mighty mountain range, especially the Caspian Gates or the Dariali Pass, and with them, trade routes and potential invasion points for the peoples of the Eurasian steppes to the north, which was actually the dominant concern for both Rome and Parthia. The power struggle in the Kingdom of Iberia took place on three levels: an internal struggle within the royal family and against arrogant landlords, between Caucasian kingdoms of Iberia, Armenia, and Albania, and broader terms between major political powers for domination in the Caucasus. The Iberians constantly had territorial conflict with their immediate neighbors, Armenia and Albania, and felt threatened by much greater Parthia. They therefore naturally looked to Rome for support and would eagerly participate in battles alongside the Romans. A Greek epitaph found in Rome informs us about the Iberian prince Amazaspus, who died in Nisibis before he could participate in a battle against the Parthians. Before embarking on the actual story of Radamistus, let us imagine Iberia, or Kartli in Georgia, as we know it now, in the 1st century, so 2,000 years ago. Greek historian Strabo, who lived at the time, describes the ancient capital. Let's move, there we go, that's Tcheta today. Describes the ancient capital as a modern town of Tcheta as a confluence of rivers of Cyrus and Aragvi, and you can see the two rivers connecting there, dotted with ancient churches. or other religious monuments at the time, obviously. As a prosperous town with a water supply, gardens, and vineyards. The town had a chief architect. Its temples and palaces were well constructed. Townhouses were stone built and roofed with tiles. Creta was a major religious center where statues of Armas and other deities were erected and religious festivals were celebrated in their honor. The palaces of the royal Farnavazid dynasty were situated in the citadel of Armas Tsikhe, overlooking the town below. So that's in Creta now, the way it looks now, obviously with churches this time. The palaces were adorned with frescoes and architectural details in Roman style, as we can see in the slides. Here, the remains of a unique hexagonal temple with a central pillar still can be seen. There were baths, storage rooms, and wine cellars, workshops for pottery and other crafts. Excavations also revealed that the Iberian elite enjoyed tremendous wealth and power. This is another ruin there. They were buried in tombs, as we can see here, made of stone and laid in a stone sarcophagi, together with luxury goods and silver coins. Their garments were adorned with golden appliques. Here you can see some of the exquisite jewelry pieces, necklaces, bracelets, and rings from the elite burial of Mtskheta necropolis, which is 1st to 3rd century AD. So all quite nice. Stuff there. They were made locally, as well as imported from Roman provinces and Parthia, and display craftsmanship of a high level. The grave goods included local Roman and Persian silverware, some of the latter most probably diplomatic gifts to Iberian high society. Sell it now. That's the Persian silver, as we can see, with inscriptions. The Iberian capital was multi-ethnic. There were 6 main languages that were spoken: Georgian, obviously, Armenian, Greek, Aramaic, Hebrew, and Khazar, which was probably a North Caucasian language, of which Greek and Aramaic were in general used for writing. The town had preserved the names of some of the ancient districts, for example, Mogwak-Tari, which was the Gate of the Magi, and Uriat-Ubani, the Jewish district. The 1st century was a time of great changes. Iberian domination in the Caucasus was facilitated by decline of Armenia next door as a result of Roman invasions of Pompey and Mark Antony, and Parthia was weakened by the internal instability. According to Tacitus, Radamistus, perhaps born in the late 20s and 30s of that century, was the firstborn son of King Pharismane I of Iberia, whose reign falls between 1st and year 58 AD. Surprisingly, King Pharismane I is not mentioned in the Georgian Chronicles, The Life of Georgian Kings by Leontin Ravelli, which was written in the 11th century. A much later source, no doubt based on early written sources. Instead, we're told that certain Aderki ruled Iberia. The Georgian sources emphasize the major event at the time, that Jesus Christ was born in the 1st year of the reign of Aderki, who ruled both Iberia and Colchis. According to this Life of Kings chronicle, news arrived in Mtskheta that the Persians had seized Jerusalem, an occurrence that caused a great sorrow among the Jews of the town, who had taken refuge there in the times of Nebuchadnezzar. Soon they heard that the Magi brought gifts, incense and gold to a newborn child. After 30 years, the Judean envoys informed the Jews of Mtskheta that this very child has proclaimed himself as the Son of God. They invited experts in faith from Mtskheta to go to Jerusalem in order to pass their judgment. Thus, a certain Elios and Longinos went to Jerusalem. They witnessed crucifixion of Jesus Christ and brought back the Lord's tunic, which was buried in Mtskheta, together with Sidonia, Elios's sister. This tale became the foundation of a legend of Mtskheta as a sacred town, a second Jerusalem, a place of heavenly holy sepulchre. In order to strengthen the significance of Georgian Patriarchate as the head of the Apostolic Church, the Life of King also mentions that during Aderki's reign, the apostle Andrew came to Georgia and converted many Western Georgian, Colchian and Clygietians to Christianity. The Iberian king Aderchi sent an army of auxiliaries to punish the Patiashas, the rulers of Colchis and Clygieti, and force the inhabitants to convert back to the religion of their forefathers. The rule of Pharismon I, which is from the year 1 to 58, coincides with the events of the reign of King Aderchi. It's quite possible that the writer or copyist at the time either made a mistake, naming Aderchi instead of Pharismanes, or it just could be, and again, we can ask Manana at the time, a bit later maybe it was another name for the same king, who was the actual king of Iberia during the period. Other scholars suggest that Pharismanes I should be identified as Aderchi's son Bartom, who together with his brother Katam ruled the kingdom during the times of Vespasian. This seems less convincing since Mithridates, the son of Pharismanes I, is known to have ruled Iberia during Vespasian's time. The fact that Pharismanes I was indeed the king of Iberia is attested by two inscriptions excavated in Treta. Hold on. Yeah. The first one is a Greek inscription from Treta, mentions name Mithridates and Pharismanes, informing that in 75 AD, Emperor Vespasian has sent financial assistance and Roman engineers to strengthen walls for the Iberian king and his people. And the second one is a fragmentary inscription mentioning King Pharismane and his son Mithridate, as it says in Greek. In Greek, what's written in a type of Aramaic known as Armazian script. Mithridates and these inscriptions should be the half-brother of Radamistus, the second son of Pharismanes I by his second wife. It's all very confusing and incestuous, as you can sort of see, but we have a little printout which is trying to connect all of them together, but maybe by the end of the lecture it will become clear. But yeah, according to Tacitus and Cassius Dio, the Empress Tiberius sent a letter to Mithridates, the younger brother of Pharismanes I, king of Iberia, and encouraged him to take the Armenian throne, so next door. He also hoped to settle a conflict between the brothers, for Mithridates would satisfy his ambition and rescue himself from the Iberian throne. Pharismane I married his daughter to his brother in order to strengthen family ties and assisted him in becoming the king of Armenia. But Pharismane's main agenda was to fulfill his own ambition. In AD 36, Pharismane I assembled a large army with the help of the Sarmatians. These are people in the north of the Caucasus, who crossed the Dariali path and then summoned Caucasian Albanian warriors, bribed the Armenian royal officials, and invaded the whole of Armenia. The Iberian army defeated the joint Parthian and Armenian army led by Orodes, the son of Artabanus II. Pharismane I smashed Orodes' helmet in combat with one blow, almost killing him. Rome and Parthia made a treaty according to which Mithridates of Iberia became the king of Armenia. But that was not to last. Emperor Caligula ordered Mithridates to visit him in Rome and imprisoned him, presumably for having gone against the emperor's wishes. Mithridates was released by Claudius. He spent some years in Rome strengthening his political ties. And in year 47, he was sent back to Armenia, where he was received with hostility. Soon, the Armenians took up arms against Mithridates, but the Iberian army managed to overcome their resistance. Meanwhile, his brother, Pharismane, had his arrogant son Radamistus, we finally get to Radamistus, to appease. Radamistus is described as an ambitious and capable young man who possessed physical strength, good looks, and courage. According to Tacitus, most of this is, as I said, sort of is from his accounts. Radamistus was very eager to become a king and was perhaps concerned about his stepmother, who tried to persuade Pharismane I to elevate her son Mithridates to the Iberian throne. Radamistus' popularity frightened Pharismane, who feared that Radamistus intended to overthrow him. In order to divert his ambitions, his father encouraged Radamistus that he would make him the king of Armenia next door by upspurring his uncle's throne and persuaded him to fall within his scheme. Thus, Radamistus fled to Armenia on the pretext that he had been ill-treated by his stepmother and asked his uncle for protection. Mithridate received him with great honor, gave him his daughter Zenobia as his wife. Radamistus wasted no time and successfully started bribing all the local officials and king's close circle. After preparing the ground for his plan, Radamistus returned to Iberia, and soon Pharismene sent his son with an army against Mithridate, accusing him of having refused to assist the Iberians, the Georgians, in a war against the Caucasian Albanians. King Mithridate and his family took refuge in Gardni Castle, as you can see then, that's in modern-day Armenia, protected by the Roman prefect Celius Pollius and centurion Casperius, who was absent at that time. Radamistus managed to persuade, or rather bribe, Pollius, who convinced Mithridates to make truce with his kinsmen. As the Mithridate, now an Armenian king, came out of the castle, but he was subjected to shameful treachery. Radamistus begged him to trust him and make a vow that he would not harm Mithridate or his family by sword or poison. After all, Mithridate was not, and bear with me now, Mithridate was not only his father's brother and his sister's husband, but his father-in-law, for Radamistus was married to his daughter Zenobia. I'll send you this afterwards so you can follow. Whom it was said he loved very much. Radamistus persuaded Mithridate to go to the palace where they could worship the Iberian Georgian gods. Mithridate consented. And now we quote Titus. To their custom, whenever they joined alliance, to unite their right hand and bind together the thumbs in a tight knot and make a slight puncture to release blood and suck it in turn. But on this occasion, the one who applied the knot pretended that it had fallen off and suddenly seized the knees of Mithridate, flinging him to the ground. At the same moment, a rush was made by others and chains were thrown around him. Radamistus was mindful of his promise, so he neither unsheathed his sword nor used any poison against his uncle to kill him. But instead, he thrown him to the ground and then smothered his uncle under mass heavy clothes and feathers. Tacitus 1247. Later, the queen and their weeping sons were also mercilessly killed. Radamistus ruled Armenia in 51 to 53 and then again 54 to 55. During his short reign, the Romans tried to achieve some stability. The Parthian king Vologases had no intention of leaving Armenia under Iberian king. The Parthians were against the Romans and the Georgian kings were put there by the Romans, just to summarize. So Parthian king Vologases had no intention of leaving Armenia under the Iberian king, supported by the Roman Empire, so the Parthians invaded Armenia, but were soon forced to withdraw due to severe winter conditions. Radamistus' vengeful and cruel rule enraged Armenians. Having lost the support of his people, Radamistus was left with the only one option, namely to flee back to Iberia, back to Georgia, together with his by now pregnant wife Zenobia. His last tragic behavior, brilliantly described again by Tacitus, is a moving story of despair, crushed ambitions, love, anguish, and hopelessness. And I quote Tacitus 1251. Radamistus had no means to escape, but for the swiftness of the horses which bore him and his wife away. Pregnant as she was, she endured, somehow or other, likely out of fear of the enemy and love of her husband. The first part of the flight, but after a while, when she felt herself shaken by its continuous speed, she implored to be rescued by an honorable death from the shame of captivity. He at first embraced, cheered, and encouraged her, now admiring her heroism, now filled with a sickening apprehension at the idea of being left to any man's mercy. Finally, urged by intensity of his love and familiarity with dreadful deeds, he unleashed his scimitar and, having stabbed her, dragged her to the banks of Arxes River and committed her to the stream. so that her body might be swept away. Then, in headlong flight, he hurried to Iberia, his ancestral kingdom. That was Titus. Against all odds, wounded and heavily pregnant Zenobia survived, actually. She had been washed by the current to the riverbank, still breathing. Zenobia was found by a shepherd who realized that she belonged to the royal family. He took her to the Artaxata, where the new king Tiridates kindly received her in his palace. Zenobia gave birth to a healthy boy, but unfortunately nothing is known to their fate or what happened to her or her children after that. As for Radamistus, he returned to Pharismain, a broken man who had lost his wife and son, and most importantly, his reputation and people's support. In 58, Radamistus was put to death by his own father, who also aimed to prove his loyalty to Rome. The charge was treachery and plotting against the royal power. Pharismain I was succeeded by his son Mithridate. Radamistus vanished from the history of Georgia forever. No surprise, the heartbreaking story of Radamistus and Zenobia, charged with controversial emotions of ambition, cruelty, despair, and defeat, with love, fear, and sacrifice, had fueled the imagination of neoclassical painters. So as we can see here, there's Luigi Sabatelli in the 18th century. Next to it is Nicolas Poussin, also in 18th century. I don't think it's in the current exhibition at the National. Oh, hold on 1 second. At the door, if we can get then we have Pietro Francesco Alberti. This is even earlier. This is 17th century. William Burger in 19th century, and Jean-Joseph Alessandro, which is also 18th century. So we have some very nice art there. So their exquisite paintings capture the culmination of the tragic ending of love aspirations of this handsome Oriental couple. Go back one up so you can see. So Georgia never lacked ambitious and charismatic individuals who made their positive and often negative impact on the troublesome history of the country. Modern politics still dominate by internal power struggles and external conflicts, so hopefully the Western's aspirations and Western values, not to be sort of maybe looking at Rome or parallels here, and human rights will be improved and help the support of the world community. Thank you. This.
You're right. I think so, thank you, yes. I think that's fine. Right, I think we're okay. Microphone, yeah. It's fine, I think that's fine. Right. Your Excellency, Director, ladies and gentlemen, I'm Ruth Smith, and it's a great privilege and I think quite a novelty for the Royal Asiatic Society and the Georgian Society to have somebody who studies the works of Handel addressing them. And I feel very pleased to be doing that this evening. I'm very glad of the invitation because it made me look at this opera of Handel's Radamisto from rather a new angle, which is always nice. I have been asked to answer the question, why did Handel write Radamisto? A good question, you might think, after hearing the previous paper. And in order to answer it, I need to go back a bit and give you some context, if you will bear with me, both for Handel and for opera in England when he wrote Radamisto. This is Handel in 1727, when he'd already been in England for 17 years and was taking British citizenship. And was already in his portly phase. I'll show you a picture in a minute of him in his younger days when he was writing Radamisto. We have irritatingly few documents emanating from Handel himself to explain his aims. But it's generally agreed that he came to England in 1710 with a view to being an opera composer, specifically a composer of Italian opera, which he had gone to Italy from Germany to learn to write, and for which there was a new avidity amongst the British moneyed classes, but no British composer sufficiently familiar with Italian-style opera or with the necessary contacts amongst the international singer galaxy. During Handel's first decade in England, his opera productions, like others of the time in London, were ad hoc affairs. There was no regular opera company or an opera organization, nobody actually regularly putting on opera, because then, as now, opera was financially precarious, not to say perilous. In 1719, an enterprise called the Royal Academy was launched to supply what London lacked compared with other major European centers. Paris, Dresden, Venice, Naples, Madrid, Vienna all had permanent court or civic opera, mostly performing in the lingua franca of opera, Italian, and competing to hire the best singers in the world, those born and trained in Italy, singers by whom the British aristocracy had been entranced on their grand tours or indeed on their diplomatic missions. The Royal Academy was named in imitation of the Académie Royale de la Musique of Paris, later the Paris Opera. The British were very conscious of how Louis XIV had used art to elevate the French nation in its own eyes and the eyes of others. And the British at this time really bought into the idea of art as a measure of national stature. And that was the pitch to subscribers to the Royal Academy. The published prospectus for the company stated, "Operas are an encouragement and support to an art that has been cherished by all polite nations. They carry along with them some marks of public magnificence and are the great entertainment which strangers, meaning visiting foreigners, share in. Therefore, it seems very strange that this great and opulent city hath not been able to support public spectacles of this sort for any considerable time." In France, the state was the king, hence French opera glorified him. Britain, of course, was a constitutional, not an absolutist monarchy. And London was a European capital of finance. So the Royal Academy was aptly launched as a joint stock company with 21 directors. Its list of 60 subscribers was headed by King George I, but it was not just royal, it included nobility, members of the government, and high-ranking army officers, the establishment, the people with their fingers on the pulse of national affairs. Their funding provided top artists. Leading Italian singers commanded fees about 10 times the cost of leading theatre personnel. And they engaged top composers, including Handel. Ooh, it doesn't want to go forward. Can anybody, or do I do the down arrow?
Try it sideways. No.
Okay. Just the.
So I do it by just
yeah,
mousing, yes.
Well,
Okay,
yeah.
well, we'll see how we go. So here's Handel in 1720 by James Thornhill. He was sent to Italy to recruit the top singers available, also actually to Dresden, where a lot of them were congregating. Above all, he was told, try to get hold of the stellar alto castrato Senesino, who is on the left in this cartoon. This is a cartoon of an opera that Handel wrote in 1723, so after Radamisto, and Senesino is on the left, and the star soprano of the day, Cuzzoni, is in the middle. This is the sort of cartoon that nationalist xenophobic critics delighted in. They protested that it was very silly indeed, positively shameful, to sit through 3 hours of caterwauling in a language one didn't understand. Okay, there were no surtitles in those days, but the audience did have the text to follow, the libretto, the word book. And as you see, it was dual language with the Italian on one page and the translation on the facing page. They could follow this during the performance. House lights didn't dim, candles blazing all the time. And they often bought these to read in advance so they knew what was going to happen. So what were the libretto texts that they were buying? Usually, these were texts based on existing librettos, pre-existing librettos that were in general European circulation, which the local librettist then adapted to the local taste. Often they had their origins in French classical drama, the dominant stage vehicle of heroism, moral choice, and propriety. Because the Royal Academy shared the standard 18th century view that good art had to be more than mere entertainment, it had to enlighten and improve. The Royal Academy staged opera seria, serious heroic opera, with plots using the best accredited subject matter for palatable instruction. Stories from major passages of classical and world history. Stories about people who mattered, who had influence, like the Royal Academy audience themselves. So why, given what you've heard about Radamistus, why an opera that is meant to be full of moral sentiment and propriety? Well, it wasn't such an odd choice for an 18th century European composer because it was a common subject. There were 15 Radamisto operas in circulation in Europe between 1668 and 1712. And Handel's liveliest opera librettist, Nicola Haim, who was also the secretary of the Royal Academy and its cellist, excellent chap. He was also a very good numismatist, incidentally. In his library of over 300 librettos, he had 7 different librettos about Radamistus. The one that he and Handel used for their Radamisto did indeed derive from French tragedy, a play by Scudery, the great rival of Corneille, a play that was very celebrated at the time, which had been adapted into an Italian libretto, 5 acts in Venice in 1710, and then, as I say, these things circulated and were adapted. So another version was done in Florence in 1712 in 3 acts, and that version was Handel and Haim's source. Well, bearing in mind what you've heard so far about Radamistus, I do feel I should tell you the story of Handel's opera, and this takes some time, and this is where the handout comes in with the coloured lines on it, though whoops. Oh, no, it doesn't want to do the mouse thing either. Help! Oh, no, it's a mouse of great delicacy. There, thank you, we're there. Sorry. Okay, I asked David to make this into a handout, which he kindly did, because I wasn't sure you'd be able to see this. I didn't know how big the room is. Red means illicit love, and green is allies. And you will recognize some of the names. Farasmane, father of Radamisto, who is married to Zenobia, as you see. And now Tiridate is new to us. And in brief, all Radamistus's bad qualities are vested in Tiridate in this version. So let me tell you the story. Tiridate, as you see, is married to Radamisto's sister, Polissena. Polissena is devoted to her husband, a position she maintains throughout the opera, despite his appalling treatment of her. She is one of the 2 heroic, beleaguered, unswervingly faithful women in the opera. The other is Radamisto's wife, Zenobia, Tiridate's sister-in-law and the object of Tiridate's passion. To gain her, and for no other reason, he wages war on Farasmane, the father of Radamisto and Polissena. By the time the opera starts, Tiridate has Farasmane in chains. You heard earlier about him being in chains. This is very significant. It's a terrible, terrible disgrace amongst the Iberians of the period to be in chains. Pharasmane is. And he's a hostage, and his kingdom has been reduced to its capital city, where Radamisto and Zenobia are sheltering, and which Tiridate is besieging, threatening to kill Pharasmane if Zenobia is not handed over to him. He's brought her along on this war because he's afraid there might be an insurrection in his absence, and he doesn't want to lose her because she's useful to him as well. Zenobia offers to yield herself even unto death, to prevent the deaths of her husband and father-in-law. Radamisto offers to yield himself in order to preserve his father's life, and Pharasmane commands Radamisto on no account to sacrifice his honor and the last vestiges of the kingdom. So Tiridate storms the city and takes it. But Radamisto and Zenobia escape, hotly pursued. And the next scene is the one piece of the opera that derives from Tacitus. And the only account of Georgian history that the 18th century audience in London would have known, because some of them at least knew Tacitus. As they flee along the river Araxes, Zenobia, recognizing that her exhaustion is preventing them from outrunning their pursuers, and so that Radamisto at least will survive, begs him to kill her. Appalled, but realizing that if he doesn't do so, she will be dishonored by Tiridate, he tries to do what she asks, but manages only to wound her slightly, whereupon she casts herself into the river to his despair. And let me just give you a rest from my voice by playing you a tiny fragment of the long aria that, oh, now, is it going to behave for me? No. Oh, maybe yes. This is a very sensitive mouse, as you can see. This is a very long aria, which he sings when he thinks she's dead. Just a bit of it. I hope you could hear from the accompaniment that this is not the Radamistos we know from history. This is a man for whom Handel, evidently, and therefore we too, have great compassion. And this became one of his most famous arias. Let me just see if it will go. Yes, back to the plot. So Radamisto is captured by Tiridate's ally Tigrane. Tigrane admires Radamisto's integrity and loves, you can see Tigrane over there on the left, he loves Radamisto's slighted sister, Polysena, to whom, in hopes of gaining her favor, he now takes Radamisto in disguise. Radamisto is in disguise. Tiridate, never having seen him up close, won't realize who he is. Meanwhile, Zenobia is retrieved alive from the river, not as in Tacitus by shepherds, but by Tiridate's ally Frate, who delivers her to Tiridate, much to his pleasure. While he makes overtures, of course, in vain, to Zenobia, Radamisto is revealing to his sister that he has come to kill her husband, thus involving Polissena in a dreadful moral choice. This is so characteristic of Baroque opera. She determines to help the one whose life is the more endangered. A lovely scene follows in which Tiridate and Zenobia receive news of Radamisto's supposed death from Radamisto himself, disguised as Radamisto's faithful servant, Ismene. Tiridate is deceived, but Zenobia instantly recognizes her husband's voice, and they are able to have a conversation in which they affirm their love for each other, all couched as a supposed message to her from the dying Radamisto, and as what she would have said in reply. He plays his part, and she holds her nerve so well that Tiridate, hoping that the faithful servant will persuade Zenobia in his favor, leaves them alone together, an opportunity for Handel to write one of his admired end of second act duets, and a rare moment of happiness in the opera. In the next act, Tiridate utterly renounces Polissena and, having been again repulsed by Zenobia, is about to ravish her. When Radamisto, Polissena, and Pharasmene all burst in, Radamisto advancing to kill Tiridate, but held back by Polissena. Tiridate will spare Radamisto from execution only if Zenobia is handed over to him, yet again forcing a terrible choice. Radamisto and Zenobia say a sad farewell to each other. Final scene. In the temple, Tiridate is preparing to marry Zenobia regardless, when Polissena brings news of a mass rebellion. The temple is surrounded. Radamisto, Zenobia, and Polissena urge Tiridate to yield to love, to honor, to virtue, but he refuses. Tigrane and Frate, leading the rebellion, enter at the head of the army and citizenry. But all present will forgive Tiridate if he renounces Zenobia and takes back Polissena. Overcome by such generosity, Tiridate acknowledges his wickedness, takes back Polissena, and is duly forgiven. He and Polissena are restored to their throne. Zenobia and Radamisto celebrate in a duet, and all rejoice in a final chorus. So why was this story chosen for the Royal Academy's first season? Never mind about why was history so altered, but why was this story chosen? Well, yes, it ticked three necessary boxes. One, it had the right number of roles. Two, it was a clash of passion, principles, and dynasties. Favorite setup for Baroque opera. And three, it was full of drama and heroism, full of opportunities for Handel to display his magnificent powers of characterization and evocations of pathos. But all that applied to dozens of other librettos in circulation. And the London audience knew none of the other Radamisto operas, so there was no familiar narrative by which they could orientate themselves. No, is this going to go in the right direction? No. Oh. Oh, this mouse doesn't like me one bit. We will, no, we will get there. I hope I haven't been giving you the wrong text all this time. It seems to be going round in circles. Oh, we're getting there. Thank you. That was the down arrow.
That's the arrow. It's
Down or side?
well, the side I used. It's come back to life. It's not your fault. It's that.
Fine. Well, thank you. I did search around in 18th century texts for any mention of Radamistus, and this was the longest I could find about him, which is much truer to history. But, you know, this is just from a general encyclopedia, and it's very short indeed. So that, you know, they would really not have known much about Radamistus. Admittedly, not knowing that he was a complete villain would have made it easier to stage an opera in which he was a total hero. I think the really interesting answer to why Handel wrote this opera lies in the intergenerationally dysfunctional nature of the Hanoverian royal family, specifically George I and his son, the future George II. Once the family was in England as its new rulers, George I's jealousy was roused by the popularity of the Prince of Wales and his wife Caroline. Tension exploded in a row over the christening of the young couple's new baby. The king ordered George, Prince of Wales, to leave the court, thinking that Caroline, his wife, would stay behind with her children. She chose instead to be loyal to her husband and live with him at Leicester House, separated from their 5 young children who remained under kingly supervision because they were technically crown property, and giving herself and the prince immense heartache. They were loving parents at this stage, but gaining great public respect and even affection. That was in 1717, hold that date. The rift between the king and his son lasted for 3 years. Handel withdrew from the court because composing for either generation, his ruler or George and Caroline, would have alienated the other. The king was his master, had been his master in Hanover. The prince and princess were of an age with him, and all 3 had enjoyed making music together domestically when they were in Hanover. Handel was very attached to Caroline. Any of you who know the funeral anthem for Queen Caroline will realize how attached he was. And I don't think it's fanciful to see a reflection of her suffering and his sympathy in the anguished situations and music of Zenobia and Polissena. Certainly his music for them gives them tremendous stature, even overriding the confines of the normal aria form, the da capo aria. For example, in Zenobia's farewell to Radamisto in the last act, still flashing with heroism after 3 hours of suffering. Let me see if I can give you a bit of this. just to say briefly why this is very original. Arias came in two halves. You would sing the first section, then usually the second section would be a contrasting one, and then you would return to the first section, now having gone through that emotional phase, and you would repeat the first section with decoration, partly to show what a brilliant singer you were, but partly to show how you had moved on from when you first sang this, now with the contrasting emotion absorbed. And you will have noticed that this is in two sections, but Handel overrode that. He started a completely different mood in the third line of the first section. This would have startled all the people who knew anything about opera at the time. Handel was certainly opera's first great feminist composer. The planning of the Royal Academy and the planning of a reconciliation between the king and his son marched together. The Royal Academy, to be viable, both financially and as a public display of national strength, needed their joint sponsorship. And I think it's fairly self-evident that the choice of the Radamisto story was geared to the plan of reconciliation, given its dynastic plot, given its focus on a monarch and his children, and given the devoted loyalty of a son to the father and the loving protectiveness of the father to the son right at the start of the opera. Radamisto was planned to be the opening opera of the new Royal Academy, and it was to be the scene of a public reconciliation between the king and the prince. What's more, whereas normally the librettist of an opera dedicated it to a patron, usually an aristocrat or minor royal, not only did Handel, the composer, not the librettist, sign the dedication of Radamisto, but he dedicated it to the king. Hence my title, An Opera Fit for a King. Handel certainly thought it was an opera fit for a king, as did the directors of the Royal Academy, who planned the first season. Well, best laid plans. The reconciliation of king and prince at court, which had to precede anything more public, didn't match the announced opening date of the Royal Academy. Another opera had to be substituted, which in itself is further evidence that Radamisto was to be the occasion of a public reconciliation. And Radamisto's premiere was held back till 4 days after the court rapprochement. And then the king and prince did appear together at the first performance. A tremendous event, and the press had a field day. But it didn't overshadow the opera itself. Handel's first biographer, Mannering, gathering information at the end of Handel's life, was told that, I quote, "In so splendid and fashionable an assembly of ladies, to the excellence of their taste we must impute it, there was no shadow of form or ceremony, scarce indeed any appearance of order or regularity, politeness or decency. Many who had forced their way into the house with an impetuosity but ill-suited to their rank and sex, actually fainted through the excessive heat and closeness of it. Several gentlemen were turned back who had offered 40 shillings for a seat in the gallery after having despaired of getting any in the pit or boxes. 40 shillings then was £350 now, so that's, top line born prices. However, the production didn't deliver one of the Royal Academy's principal ambitions, the appearance of the star castrato that I mentioned at first, that Handel was sent to Italy to try to get, Senesino. He and some Italian colleagues that the Royal Academy also tried for had been unable to break their contracts at Dresden, even for the inflated sums that the Royal Academy was offering. Senesino, in the end, came for a longer season than the first one. So that was a season of 50 performances. He wasn't in all of them. And his fee was £1,600, and you multiply that by 180 for modern prices. Please gasp. I think that's astonishing. I mean, even now, even if you were Simon Rattle, you wouldn't get that. Now, the other handout is just to show what immense lengths Handel went to. You've got that on a piece of paper. You might prefer that to looking at the screen. His cast for the first Royal Academy season in April 1720, because of the lack of Italians, actually had to be more English than Italian. Not at all what the Royal Academy wanted, but they made the best of it. So 4 English singers, 3 Italian. And he carefully accommodated the vocal lines to the much more modest training of English singers. But he wrote lavishly for a large orchestra, 34 in the orchestra, which is a lot more than many Baroque opera companies will give you now. The following season, the balance was 6-1 Italian. I say this because Handel is sometimes criticized as too easily pleased with his own work, but he certainly went the extra mile in revising Radamisto for the participation of Senesino and the other Italians. He transposed 3 roles, he axed 8 arias, he put in 10 new ones to showcase the Italians' gasp-making technical skills and to fit their individual voices. And just, you heard the lament of Radamisto earlier on. I just want to show you, though this is, of course, a modern voice, what he wrote for Senesino. That was only the first time through. When he sings it again in the da capo section, repeating that, he would, of course, have done fantastic vocal displays, compared to which Handel had written out was absolutely nothing. We do have reports of some singers being called back 5 times to sing the same aria again, and the expectation was that you would pull more fantastic ornaments out of the hat each time, and it would be more and more gasp-making. Because many in the audience actually came to hear these brilliant singers perform rather than actually for moral instruction. And it was customary for composers to write very carefully for the particular attributes of their singers. But Handel didn't just do that with his revision of Radamisto. He intensified the drama, for example, adding a new duet. And this is my last example, and indeed the end of my talk. At the critical final confrontation, when everybody bursts in and says to Tiridata, yield to honor, to virtue, to love, Handel actually wrote a quartet. Quartets are terribly, terribly rare in Baroque opera. This is looking forward to Mozart. They're actually very rare in Handel's music. But because it's rare and because it's lovely music, I hope you can hear it well enough, I'll just end with a clip. You can see what the words say. Though actually, the translation here is actually more accurate than the Italian text. This is only a little bit. Thank you very much for your attention.